Hey, welcome to The Explainer. We all try to predict the future. Every single day. We're forecasting, whether we're just trying to guess traffic on the way to work or, making a huge bet on a new business. But what if I told you that the so-called experts are no better at it than you or me? Okay, let's dive into the fascinating science of forecasting and figure out who actually gets it right and, more importantly, how they do it.
I mean, that's the big question, right? We put so much trust in experts to help us make sense of this complicated world. But when it really comes down to predicting major global events, how good are they really? Well, the answer's probably not what you think.
Wow, that is a pretty stunning quote, isn't it? But it comes from decades of serious research by a guy named Philip Tetlock. And what he found was that the super confident pundits you see all over TV, well, they were often just spectacularly wrong. And this really humbling discovery blew the doors wide open for a totally new way of thinking about prediction.
And look, this isn't just about high-stakes geopolitics. Forecasting is woven into the fabric of our everyday lives. We are constantly making judgments about what's going to happen next, whether it's a big decision or a small one. So the real question is, can we get better at it? And it turns out the answer is a huge, resounding yes.
So, okay, if the experts were pretty much failing, then who was succeeding? This question led to this groundbreaking experiment to see if forecasting was a genuine skill, something you could actually identify and maybe even teach.
So back in 2011, Tetlock's team kicked off something called the Good Judgment Project. And it was basically this massive forecasting tournament with thousands of totally regular people. Teachers, engineers, stay-at-home parents, all trying to predict world events. And buried inside all that data was a shocking discovery. A tiny group of these volunteers was consistently, almost unbelievably accurate. They gave them a name, superforecasters. Now, these weren't spies with access to classified info or anything like that. They were just ordinary people who had a very specific way of thinking, a process for working through uncertainty. Their secret wasn't what they knew, it was all about how they thought.
So what is this special way of thinking? Well, to explain it, Tetlock borrowed this brilliant metaphor from an ancient Greek poet, and it just perfectly captures the difference.
See, he divided thinkers into two groups, hedgehogs and foxes. Hedgehogs are the experts who know one big thing. They have a grand theory that explains everything, and they're super confident about it. Foxes, on the other hand, are a bit more cautious. They know lots of small things, they pull ideas from all over the place, and they're totally comfortable with nuance and complexity. And guess what? Superforecasters are, almost without exception, foxes.
Hedgehogs often get tripped up by these common mental shortcuts, or what scientists call cognitive biases. It happens because our brains love to save energy. They default to what psychologists call System 1 thinking. It's fast, it's automatic, it's our gut instinct. And it makes us do things like only look for proof that we're right, or convince ourselves we knew it all along after something happens, or even swap a really hard question for an easier one without even realizing we did it.
But superforecasters are different. They actively fight against their own biases. They force themselves to use what's called System 2 thinking. And yeah, it's slow, it's deliberate, it takes real effort, but it leads to way, way better judgments. They just instinctively know when to hit the brakes and question their own gut feelings.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. There's a twist. Sometimes being wrong isn't actually a mistake. It's a strategy. It turns out that an individual's psychology is only half the story. The incentives of the whole system play a massive role.
This idea comes from a paper by the Federal Reserve, and it's called rational bias. It basically says that for a lot of professional forecasters, being perfectly accurate isn't the only goal. Sometimes making a really bold, crazy prediction that gets your name plastered all over the news is actually more valuable for your career and your company, even if you're pretty sure it's wrong.
And this chart just illustrates it perfectly. When the only thing that matters is being accurate, everyone's predictions tend to bunch up around the most likely outcome. That's the solid line. But when getting publicity is the prize, it pays to be different. You see forecasters spread out, making these much bolder, less likely predictions. That's the dotted line, all of them hoping to be that one person who hits the jackpot and gets all the attention.
So here's the key takeaway. When you see a pundit on TV making some wildly confident prediction, they might not just be a hedgehog who's totally in love with their one big idea. They might be a completely rational person playing a game where bold, attention-grabbing forecasts get rewarded way more than cautious, accurate ones. They're playing a different game. All right, so we've got the self-aware thinking of the fox, and we understand the biases of the system. So how can we actually put all this together to make better predictions in our own lives and our own careers?
Well, it really boils down to this simple 4-step process. First, stop thinking in yes or no. Start thinking in probabilities. Assign a percentage, like a 70% chance of something happening. Second, and this is crucial, write it down. This forces you to commit, and it stops that, oh, I knew it all along feeling later. Third, you got to keep score. Go back and honestly check how you did. And finally, and this is the most important part, learn from it. What did you miss? Why were you wrong? That feedback loop is the secret sauce. That's how you get better. You know, in the end, all of this really comes back to one core trait: intellectual humility. Super forecasters aren't arrogant. They embrace the fact that the world is messy and the future is deeply uncertain. They are always willing to change their minds when new facts come in. For them, it's all about getting it right, not about being right.
So the next time you hear some expert make a really bold, super confident prediction, just ask yourself, are you looking at a hedgehog, totally blinded by their own big idea? Or are they a professional who's just playing for publicity? Or are you, maybe, just maybe, looking at a fox, carefully weighing the odds in a world they know is impossible to predict with certainty? Because knowing the difference, well, that changes everything.